Over the course of the night, 53 new patients came in. Not all of them had the rash and bleeding, but some do. The head physic ordered them all quarantined for our wing and assigned me to be the physic over the mutation. I'll be in charge of managing the patient's care from the floor while he watches from the port. Doesn't want to risk his own skin, one of the nurses mutters to me. It's alright, I tell her. I want to see it through, but that doesn't mean you have to risk it. I could ask him to reassign you someplace else. She shakes her head. I'll be alright, she smiles at me. After all, you talked him into including the courtyard as part of the quarantine area. That makes a difference. We've got the cafeteria too, I say. And she laughs. None of us spend much time there anymore, except to take delivery for our meals. The virologist comes in to examine the patients themselves. He's intrigued too. The bleeding occurs because the virus is destroying platelets, he tells me, which means the spleen is likely to become enlarged in the infected patient. A female medic near me nods. She's conducting a following-up physics exam of one of the first patients. His spleen is enlarged, she says. It's proluded breathing and costal margin, and the patient are losing the ability to clear the section of the lungs and respiratory tracts. Another medic says, we're going to run into trouble with pneumonia and infection if we can't get them better soon. Further down the road, patients, we hear a shout. We've got a rupture, a medic calls. Think he's bleeding internally. I call out on the mini port for the surgic. We all gather around the patient who has gone pale. A viral static machine screams at us and the patient's blood pressure drops and his heart rate speeds up. The medic and surgics yell out instructions. The patients and all the rest lie completely still. We can't save him. We don't even have time to get him to the surgical room before he dies. Glance around at the patients nearby and hope they haven't seen too much. What can they see? The weight of the patient's death settles over me as I pick up the mini port, which beeps instinctively with our private message from the head physic. He watched the whole thing from the mini port. Sending patient data now. Review immediately. He wants me to look at the data now. When we just had a death, the entire team looks rattled. The point of the medical center and the rising is that we save people, we don't lose them like this. I walk over to the side of the room and check the data. At first, I don't understand the urgency. This data is from the patients who have come in sick, and the information looks like basic medical workup. I'm not sure what it's supposed to tell me, then I get it. The workup are all recent, from when the patients were immunized. And still getting the mutation, which means a huge segment of the population is at risk. I'm going to have to lock down your wing completely, the head physic tells from the mini port. I understand, I tell him. There's nothing else they can do. We're going into lockdown, I tell them. They nod, exhausted. They understand. We've all been through this in drills a million times. We're here to save people. I hear footsteps behind me, running. I spin around. The virologist is heading for the main doors to the wing. Have they had time to lock down yet, or is he going to expose the entire new cluster of people to the mutated plague? I take off, running back down the rows of the patients as fast as I can. He's older than me. It's short work to catch up, and I tackle him, throwing us both to the ground. You don't run, I say. Don't bother to keep the disgust on my voice. You stay to help when people are sick. That's part of your job. Listen, he says, struggling to sit up. I let him, but I hold onto his arm. We may not be safe from the mutation. Our immunization may mean nothing. That's exactly why you can't risk exposing anyone else, I say. You know that better than anyone. I haul him up by the back of his uniform and walk him towards one of the wing's storage closets. I don't want to lock him up, but I'm not sure how else to deal with him right now. Unless the virologist says, sounding either crazy or inspired, the people with scars are safe, the small scars. I know what he means, the people who had the first round of plague. I say, the Rising told us to look for the marks. Lee and I talked about them, the small red scars between their shoulder blades. Yes, I say eagerly. They could have been slightly mutated version of the earlier virus, and the variant is close enough to the mutation form that they're not getting it. But that immunization you and I were given, it was just a chop-up piece of the original virus. It won't be close enough to the new mutation to protect us from it. I keep hold on him but not show that I'm listening. We don't go down with the earlier version of the plague, he says, but we still exposed. Our initial immunity protect us from the worst symptoms. But we still could get contacted with earlier versions of the plagues. That's how the immunization works. It teaches your body how to react to the virus, so your symptoms recognize the virus when it comes again. It's not that you don't get sick at all, but your body knows how to handle it. I know, I say. I figured out that much already. Listen to what I'm telling you, the virologist says. If that happens, and we actually contacted the first version of the plague, and the one going around with the pilot first spoke, when we have the red marks too, and we're safe. We don't go down, but we still have the virus. Our bodies dealt with it. But if we didn't catch the earlier version during that window, he spreads out his hands, we could still get the mutation. And when we are not have the cure in the works in this version. For a minute he sounds crazy, like he's speaking gibberish. Then it all comes together and I think he might be right. He twists his arm free from my grasp and starts unbuttoning the top of his plainclothes. He pulls down his collar from the back uniform. Look, he says, I don't have a small mark, do I? He doesn't. No, I say, and I resist the urge to pull down my own collar and try and see the mark is there. I never thought to look for it on myself. You need it here. And if you don't go out there, you could infect other people. And you're been exposed to the mutation already, just like the rest of us. I'll go out into the woods. People in the burrows have already known how to survive. There's places I can go. Like where? I ask. Like the stone villagers. He says. I raise my eyebrow. Is he confused? I don't know what those places are. I've never heard of them before. And they have fluid and nutrient bags there? I ask. Do they have what you needed to stay alive until there's a cure? Don't you care about exposing them to illness? He stares up at me wide-eyed panic. Don't you see him? Yes. The patient died. I can't stay here. Was the first time you'd seen anyone die in real life? I asked. People didn't die in society, he says. They did, I say. They were just better at hiding it. And I understand why the biologist is afraid. I think about running away too, but only for a second. The head physic decides to relax the lockdown long enough to send us more patients and more personnel. He heard everything the biologist told me over the mini port, so he's decided how to report it all to the pilot. I'm glad it's not my job. But I do have one request for the head physic. When you send in new personnel, I say, make sure they all know this information of the virus hasn't responded yet to the cure. We don't need anyone else trying to run. We want them to know what they're getting into. It's not long before several rising officers, armed and wearing hazmat suits, escort new personnel to our wing. The officers look at the virologist away from them. I'm not sure where they'll quarantine him. In an empty room on his own, perhaps. But he's become a liability. We can't keep him when he's so violent. I'm also focused on making sure he's taken care of, and that it takes me a moment to realize when the new staff is Lee. As soon as I can, I find her in the courtyard. You shouldn't be here, I tell her quietly. We can't guarantee that it's safe. I know, she says. They told me. They're not sure the cure works on the mutation. I'm more than that, I say. Remember when you and I were talking about the small red marks and the people who had the earlier virus? Yes. The virologist they took out had a theory about that. What is it? He thought if someone had the red marks, it meant that they had the virus, like we thought. And he also thought that meant that it would protect them from this new mutation. How could that be, Lee asks. The virus changes, I say, like those fish you were talking about. And the thing is now, it's different. She shakes her head. I try again. People who had the immunization had been exposed to one form of the virus, a dead one. Then the first round of the plague came along. Some of us might have contracted the virus and didn't really get sick because we had already been exposed to it in a weakened form. The immunization did its job, and our bodies fought off the illness. Still, we had exposed to the live virus itself, which means we might be safe from the mutation. The dead virus wasn't close enough to the mutation to protect us, but it exposed our original live version of the plague. Might be, as long as we actually contracted it. I still don't understand, she says. I'm trying again. According to his theory, those who had the red mark are lucky, I say. They have been exposed to the right version of the virus at the right times. And that means they're safe from this mutation. Like stones in the river, she says, understanding crossing her face. Going across, you need to step on them in the right order to safely get to the other side. I guess so, I say. Or, like a fish you were talking about, they change. No, she says. The fish remain themselves. They adapt, they look completely different, but they're not fundamentally altered or gone. Alright, I say, though now I'm the one who's confused. She can tell. I suppose, she says, that you have to see them. Do you have the mark, Lee? Astley? I don't know, she says. Do you? I shake my head. I'm not sure either. I say, it's not exactly an easy place to see. I'll look for you, she tells me. And before I can say anything else, she steps around behind me, slides her finger under my collar, and pulls it down. I feel her breath on my neck. If the virologist is right, then you're safe, she says. And I can hear a smile in her voice. You have the mark. Are you sure? I ask. Yes, she says. I am. It's right there. After she takes her hand away, I can feel the soft where her fingers pressed against my skin. She knows what I'm about to ask. No, she says, don't look. I don't want to change what I do. Later, as we leave the courtyard, Lee stops and looks at me. As she does, I realize not many people have eyes that are the color of hers, true black. I changed my mind, she says. At first I'm not sure what she meant, and then she sweeps her long hair to the side and says, I think I want to know. There's a faint tremor in her voice. The mark, she wants to know if she has it. All right, I say. And suddenly I feel awkward, which is ridiculous because I've looked at plenty of bodies that are just bodies. I know they're people, and I want to help them. But to some extent, they're anonymous, all the same. Her body will be hers. She turns her back to me and unbuttons her uniform, waiting. For a moment, I hesitate, my fingers hovering. And then I take a deep breath and pull her collar down. I'm careful not to brush her skin. The mark isn't there. Then, without thinking, I do touch her, with my hand on where my palm flat against the bone and base where the neck of my fingers curve into her hair, like I can hide this from her. Then I draw my breath and pull my hand back, stupid. Because I'm fully immune doesn't mean I can't still carry some form of the mutated plague. I'm sorry, I begin. I know, she says. She reaches over and takes my hand down without looking at me for a brief moment, and our fingers lock and hold. Then she lets go and pushes open the door, walking inside the building without looking back. Now nowhere, I think. So this is how it feels to stand at the edge of the canyon.